Everyone in America has a healthcare horror story. If you don't have one personally yet, you likely have close friends and loved ones who do. Maybe you've been on the receiving end of a bloated and Kafkaesque health insurance system that is fundamentally designed to eliminate patients, you as a cost center. You or someone you love may have faced chronic and debilitating pain and denied treatment because in an attempt to curb our country's opioid crisis, healthcare providers are forced to treat people who need prescription painkillers as suspect and possibly criminal actors. You may even know someone who died because healthcare was denied or delayed, which happens to a little under 70,000 people a year. And perhaps you live in fear that this will happen to you if you become sick or seriously injured. In the days following the shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, America responded with an outpouring of rage and frustration, not at the shooter, but at the for-profit healthcare system that failed him and fails Americans all the time. Luigi Mangione was smart and promising, well-liked by his peers, and there were no indications before the shooting that he planned to carry out a murder. In the wake of his arrest, however, we've learned that he was suffering from Lyme disease and horrific back pain that sometimes left him confined to bed for days at a time, and that he was convinced this would prevent him from ever having a relationship or a normal life. He had a spinal fusion surgery that, instead of making things better, may have made things worse. In a manifesto he was carrying in his notebook and scattered among his trail of internet posts, there's a story of despair, increasing desperation, and finally anger. None of this justifies what he did, but it's easy to see why the overwhelming response in the days following was often sympathetic to his rage, if not his actions. Americans have a near universal experience of being betrayed by a heavily for-profit system that is designed to help them and often harms them instead, solely for the sake of higher profits. This experience cuts across partisan and class lines. Only the richest of the very rich can buy their way out of a catastrophic health event and the administrative burden that comes with navigating one, or afford expensive and sometimes illegal ways to manage pain. Everyone else is stuck with a system that can potentially bankrupt them while also failing to provide adequate care, despite insanely expensive premiums. While healthcare issues in general skew partisan when it comes to specific policy preferences, this anger at the American healthcare system is shared by people across the ideological spectrum and rooted in the idea that everyone's quality of life and longevity is determined in some way by faceless bureaucrats who are heavily incentivized to prioritize profits over patients. This became clear as people tried to puzzle out the shooter's politics. When right-wing commentator Ben Shapiro tried to pin the outrage on the heartless left, which celebrated a CEO's murder, his own followers revolted. "I'm not buying this left versus rights anymore, Ben," one commented. "I want healthcare for my family." When it turned out that the shooter admired people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, people on the left mostly shrugged. His politics were beside the point. For many justifiably angry Americans, this is not about Brian Thompson specifically. That said, perverse systems that cause harm are not divorced from individual actors. For-profit health insurance did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the product of many decisions made over time by many people, and those decisions add up. At United Healthcare, decisions made by executives, including Thompson, have resulted in the industry record for denials of care, and a recent decision to implement algorithmic evaluations that deny 90% of claims. When you're stuck in the pediatric oncology ward, watching your child die because insurance thinks the doctor's recommended treatment plan is too experimental, or when you're watching someone you love experience unremitting pain that no one will treat or pay for, or you simply find yourself buried in mountains of paperwork and bills when you're too sick to navigate it. Who do you blame? Who can be held accountable? Everyone intuitively understands that there are individual people responsible for this state of affairs and no real mechanisms to prevent them from causing harm. I have a recent horror story of my own, though it pales in comparison to many. Just before Thanksgiving, I had an emergency appendectomy. I waited to go to the emergency room until I was absolutely sure that I needed to, because I've been walloped with surprise ER bills before, after a series of pregnancy complications and an instance where I was misdiagnosed with a brain aneurysm. I had good insurance then, and supposedly have good insurance now. Immediately post-operation, I was given Percocet for pain and was discharged with instructions for recovery, including when and how to take a 3-day supply of Percocet or 8 tablets. Everything should have been good after that, but being a patient in America's healthcare system is less a healthcare journey, which implies that a series of experiences that are difficult but ultimately rewarding, than a healthcare nasty fall down a steep flight of stairs. At best, it's inconvenient, and at worst, it might kill you. No one called in the prescription for the pain meds, and I couldn't figure out who was supposed to. The hospital referred me to the surgeon, and when I finally was able to get in touch, he was irritated and dismissive and suggested that I go back to the ER if over-the-counter Tylenol wasn't good enough. I pointed out that he had signed off on the discharge instructions, and he finally said he'd deal with it the following morning, after telling me he didn't like my tone. He never did, and I just spent that week in needless pain. I thought some of it was gendered. A disturbing 2001 study about bias against women who report pain. Researchers found that women reporting the same amount of pain as men were likely to be given sedatives, and men were likely to be given painkillers. The surgeon had implied that the pain was attacking my emotional core, as opposed to the part of my body where my appendix used to be. This had happened to me once before, under similar circumstances. After I had a C-section, my OB-GYN of many years also denied me Percocet on the basis that when I asked if I would be prescribed it. A reasonable question, since nurses were giving it to me every few hours. I was, in his words, exhibiting drug-seeking behavior. For context, the only time I have ever had a prescription for any kind of painkiller in my entire 48 years of life was when I had all 4 wisdom teeth removed as a teenager, and it was prescription acetaminophen. There was no reason to believe that I would abuse an opioid, especially having never been prescribed one. The pain was worse post-pregnancy and lasted longer. I was caring for a newborn by myself, while my husband was at work and doing all sorts of things by necessity that exacerbated the pain, on top of the usual anxiety and exhaustion all first-time mothers feel, and it was nearly impossible to sleep or function normally. What should have been a happy time was horrifically miserable, and I'm still angry about it. Just as my post-appendectomy pain was starting to subside, I received a letter from my insurance company Blue Cross Blue Shield. It informed me that my treatment for acute appendicitis was not medically necessary, and the claim for my appendectomy was denied. It listed the wrong healthcare provider and claimed that I had not received any scans or diagnosis, which would be news to the doctors and nurses who treated me. But we have a system that defies any sort of logic. Someone in the claims department, or maybe an algorithm, is able to posit a scenario where I could walk into an emergency room, demand an appendectomy, and get one. No questions asked. A cosmetic appendectomy, perhaps? This is probably a coding error, but it illustrates the absurdity of the whole system. I'm short an appendix now, but still have my spleen. And unlike the 70,000 or so Americans who die every year for preventable reasons related to inadequate healthcare coverage and denials, I am able to vent it. And I sympathize, not with the alleged shooter, but with the people who are furious because our healthcare system so often fails to provide care. We're all angry because much of what our healthcare system does feels fundamentally immoral. It's not just the tactics, the dishonesty, for example, of delaying care in order to force patients to forego it, but also the deep extractive nature of the business. Even the biggest fans of capitalism do not believe that maximizing shareholder value is something that excuses all consideration of harm to customers. And healthcare is one of the few industries where customers experiencing harm is ubiquitous. Perhaps no other industry is as likely to affect every American individual directly and horrifically. Not weapons manufacturers, not companies that wreck the environment, not predatory lenders. This is not some backlash against CEOs, who are often glorified in America's hyper-capitalist culture. It's a collective realization that our broken system is killing us. For more, you can read my New York Times columns here, other writing here, and you can sign up for my online opinion writing workshop here. And here are a couple of other Medium posts I wrote that people seem to like. Sex for Fun, on the politics of control and why people are so bothered by female sexual pleasure. Justice for All, Grandpa Pickleball, Alvin Bragg, Donald Trump, Khalif Browder, and a personal story. And just for fun, here's a Willie No parody that absolutely no one asked for.